guys. Um, so my name is Tharindu, and so this will be like a crash course to Laravel because I'll be covering the basics of Laravel and how you can use it as a starting point and continue developing projects with Laravel. All right. So and I will not just cover the basics, and I will not just teach you the basics, but I will teach you with a practical project, which is a REST API, so that you can understand the practical use of these tools that Laravel has. So, all right. So let's get started. So these are the topics that I'll be covering. First, I'm gonna talk about why framework is important. I mean, not just developing with a pure language. Why frameworks are important when we are developing an application, and then we're gonna be talking about why we use Laravel among all other PHP frameworks. There are tons of frameworks in PHP, but specifically why we use Laravel when we are developing a web application. And then we will be setting up the environment, the development environment on your local computer. And after that, we will install Laravel from the official documentation. And finally, uh, and then we will take a look at the folder and file structure of a fresh Laravel installation, so that you can understand what each files and folders are for. And then finally, we will write some code. We will be developing a real world project, a REST API. All right. If mentioning something about me, my name is Tharindu Lakshitha, and I currently work at Arimac as a software engineer, and I'm from 6th CIS batch. I was graduated in 2019, and yeah, it's been a while. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys, my juniors, um, after 1.5 years of my graduation. All right. So you can find me on these platforms. You can find me on GitHub, and you can follow me on my YouTube channel. And also you can follow me on my blog, which I publish articles regarding web development. Okay. Well, web development with Laravel. You might be a beginner, or you might have not even heard of Laravel. It doesn't really matter. Like I said, this will be a crash course, so I'll be covering the basics and using this as a starting point so that you can continue your development with Laravel. And I assume that you have some knowledge in PHP, the basic PHP, but if you don't, just don't worry, you can still follow up with this course, and you will know how the things work in web development. All right. So why we use a framework? Well, uh, before learning any framework, you need to understand why you need to learn a framework. Why you need to use a framework for developing application. Well, frameworks frameworks solve general issues. When you let's say when you are developing an application, a framework provides a general solution that most programmers face when they are developing an application in a particular area. For example, let's say you are developing a web application with Java. You can use uh, Spring Boot as the framework, because Spring Boot contains all the common functionality needed for developing and developing a web application with Java. Same with JavaScript. If you, let's say if you are developing a front-end application with JavaScript, you can use something like React, because React provides the common functionality for developing front-end application. So you don't have to recreate modules and stuff by yourself. You can use them when they are provided by the framework. And of course, you can build an application without a framework. I mean, rather than using a framework, you can create any application with from the scratch. But if it is a traditional app, you will have to recreate everything from the scratch on your own. For example, request and response handling and validations, accessing databases, the database drivers. You will have to implement all this by yourself. So it's something like reinventing the wheel. So you don't want to do that when you are developing an application, because you just want to focus on your application logic. Let's say when you are developing an e-commerce application, you just want to focus on how the items are sold and how the sellers can list down their products, how the buyers can order products from the e-commerce website, stuff like that. But if you have to develop things like if you have to worry about things like how I connect my application to the database, how I develop my database module, and how I write my validations, if you have to worry about those things, you will lose focus on your application logic. But when you are using something like a framework, you don't have to worry about those stuff, because the framework does it for you. All right. And one other important thing regarding frameworks are the safety. Let's say when you are developing something, there can be some security issues, but the frameworks address those security issues because they are very common in that particular area. So frameworks have fixed those security issues, so you don't have to worry about those security breaches and everything. So rather than so you will make less mistakes when you are using a framework rather than implementing the same module from the scratch by yourself. So that's really important. As a developer, you just need to focus on developing your application rather than worrying about other stuff like this. So I hope you understood the importance of using a framework. Let's move on. And why we use Laravel among other frameworks in PHP? There are tons of framework for PHP. CodeIgniter, YII, Symfony, Cake PHP. There are so many of them. And why we use Laravel? Well, currently Laravel is the fastest growing PHP framework, and it is the #1 framework, a PHP framework on GitHub. And also it is beginner friendly. It has so much of community support available on the internet. You can find so many articles, so many videos on YouTube, so many videos on other platforms like Udemy, and Laravel itself has a very rich documentation provided, and you can have so many contributors. So you won't be stranded when you are developing something with Laravel. And also, you will you have so many third-party plugins. Let's say you are developing an application, you need to implement something like an authentication module. Here you can use a third-party plugin developed by a third-party developer. You just don't have to implement it by yourself. You can download it and use it in your system. You can extend the functionality of your Laravel project very easily. All right. So we have a question. What is the difference between Laravel and CodeIgniter? They are two different frameworks, and they have architectural differences and also the functionality differences. So Laravel is mostly based on Symfony, and earlier I was into CodeIgniter, and what I felt was when switching to Laravel from CodeIgniter, uh, rather than using CodeIgniter, Laravel has done most of the part for us more than CodeIgniter. So uh, I have to do less configuration when I am using Laravel rather than CodeIgniter. All right, so that's the most basic difference between CodeIgniter and Laravel. And okay, so and Laravel is so much powerful because you can build projects from small website and to a large scale enterprise application. And from my opinion, in my opinion, from the industrial perspective, you have more job opportunities and more salary, and also more vacancies with for Laravel rather than other PHP framework. So I think we have good reasons to learn Laravel. We have a question. Does the Lumen is subcategory of Laravel? Yes, Lumen is especially made for creating APIs. Laravel has this separate module for UI, developing user interfaces. But in Lumen, it doesn't continue. It doesn't have that. It only provides functionality for building APIs. So it's a minimal. I prefer saying it's a minimal version of Laravel that has the most necessary features for building APIs. All right. All right. Now let's set up the development environment for developing Laravel applications. And well, Laravel is built with PHP, so you need to have PHP on your computer to before you start developing Laravel. And to execute these web pages, you need to have a web server as well. And also to connect a database, to host a database, you need to have a database server, something like MySQL or Postgres on your computer. Well, you don't have to install these three manually by one. You can use something like RAM server or SAM. Once it's downloaded and complete, you can run PHP applications, PHP web pages on your local computer. And the next requirement you need to have is Composer. Well, if you are not familiar with programming PHP frameworks, this might little bit confusing. Composer is a dependency manager. It is it's exactly as a manager, as the name says. It's what it does is it downloads and install all the dependencies your application requires. You don't have to manually download them all by visiting internet. You just have to run some commands. It will download and install all the dependencies for your application. So it will be really convenient tool for us when we are developing uh, using Laravel. Not just Laravel, developing any application, Composer is really helpful for us to download dependencies. And you can download it, and also Laravel is also a package that depends on other packages. So that's why we need Composer on our local computer. And you can download it from getcomposer.org and download it as a exe and install it. Make sure you set up the environment variables in the path variable so that you can access the Composer from your terminal anywhere on your computer. If this is confusing, just do a quick Google search and you will find it easily. All right. So once this is completed, all the requirements completed, now it's time to install Laravel. Well, to install Laravel, head over to Laravel documentation, just Google install Laravel, and the first result is from the Laravel documentation, and there is a section called installation. And in this installation section, as you can see, you can install Laravel using two different methods. You can install with Laravel installer, and also you can install with Composer itself. For the simplicity, I'm gonna go with the second option. With this command, just copy this command. You don't have to memorize these commands. Copy this command and go to your where the local host is located and open up the terminal. I'm already navigated to this location and create a new folder using mkdir and create. I'm going to name this new project. So my folder is created. Navigate to that folder and paste down this command you just copied from Laravel documentation. Hit enter, and this will install Laravel with all the dependencies required for Laravel. It will take some time to complete depending on your speed of your internet connection. Well, I'm gonna stop this process because I have already downloaded a fresh installation of Laravel. I'm gonna navigate to that folder. So I'm inside this Laravel installation directory. All right. So we have installed Laravel, and now I'm going to open this Laravel project in my favorite editor. This VS Code. I'm going to run this command code and period, and this will open up VS Code with my project. All right. So let's take a quick look at about these files and folders. I'm not going to explain each of them, every one of them, because it will make it complicated. I'm going to explain few of these folders and files that is needed for developing Laravel application. And we have a question. So can we also design microservice architecture using Lumen or Laravel? Of course you can. You can use even Laravel. You can use Lumen, which is especially made for developing APIs, and microservice is based on services, so multiple APIs. So we can achieve that with Lumen and Laravel. Can you suggest some plugins for Laravel in VS Code? Actually, I'm not much familiar with VS Code as a code editor. What I use most in professional development is PHP Storm. But for VS Code is much lighter. If you are if you are going with Laravel development, I can recommend PHP using PHP Storm because it has so much of features, so many of features than VS Code uh, in PHP Storm. All right. So here we have few folders. App folder. This is where the you can write most of your application. You can define controllers, models, and a custom exception. Most of the application logic goes this inside this app folder. And there's another folder called config, and this is where you can define all the configuration, database configuration, file system configuration, and stuff like that. And inside this database folder there are a few folders, and you can find this migration folder where you can define all the migrations. And if you don't know what migrations are, I'll come to that in a minute. And you can define seeds as well. Just don't worry if you don't these things. And inside this public folder, this is where you can define all the assets. Let's say when you are developing a website, you need to store your CSS files, your JavaScript libraries like jQuery and all. You can put those files here. This is the ideal folder for that. And inside this resource folder, this is where you can put everything regarding your UIs, your user interfaces. Inside this views folder, you can put all the UIs needed for your application when you are developing a website. And inside this route folder, you can define all the routes. There are few files for that. I will explain them later. This is where you can define all the routes. Route is like a URL that you can access a certain resource in your application. All right. And storage folder, this is where you can upload files and keep your all the logs and everything of your application. And there comes the vendor folder. This is where the composer download and install all the dependency packages for your application. Well, you are not supposed to edit these files, change anything inside this folder, because it is totally managed by uh, composer. So you don't have to mess with these files. That will break the functionality of your application. So just keep it as it is. All right, that's everything about the folders. And there are some files I need to especially explain. There's this .env file, and this is the environment variable file. As the name suggests, the environment file. This is where you can define all the database credentials and things like environmental values like mail credentials, file system credentials, and stuff like that. And also there is this composer.json file. This is where you can define all the dependencies. This file is read by the composer when downloading and installing all the dependencies. As you can see, there are a few requirements already defined in this file. You can define your own dependencies as well. All right. And there is this package.json file as well when your application needs some npm packages. So those requirements, those dependencies will be defined here. So it will install them according to the requirements. All right, so that's it for the overview of this file now for this project. And I think now we should write some code to create something meaningful, not just developing something meaningless. Let's create something meaningful. Okay, let's go back to our presentation. Um, all right, so we have installed Laravel, and let's create the project. What we are going to create is a REST API. Well, REST API is something that provides an interface for accessing data in a database or something, that you can connect other applications to this API by using certain endpoints. What we are going to build is an inventory system. We will go with the simplest solution, and we are going to create two tables, products and users. As you can see, the users can the functionality of the system will be users can register, users can log into the system, and then they can create products, they can read products, they can fetch all the products, they can delete and update those products. So it's the basic functionality of any inventory system. So that's what we will be building in this project. But I don't think I have time for implementing both these modules, so I will just stick with products module. If we have time, we will go with the users module. All right, so I will hope to implement these endpoints. As you can see, there are 5 endpoints needed for this product module. As you can see, this endpoint is for fetching all the products of the system, of the database, and this post endpoint is for creating new products. And in this URL structure, this get endpoint is for fetching a single product, and this patch endpoint is for updating a single product, and delete is for deleting a single product. All right, and Laravel follows the same MVC architecture popular in web development. MVC architecture, the MVC stands for Model View Controller. Well, these are 3 layers. Model layer is the layer that connect our application to the database. It works as the intermediate layer between our application and the database. And then we have the controller layer, which is which resides the logic. That's where we define our logic. So the data is processed here in this controller layer. And finally, we have view layer, which is the presentation layer that user can access those data. This layer is what the user sees. All right, so I think we got a little understanding about what we are going to implement. First, we are going to create a database, and we will create a table. Then we will create a model layer to access the database with our application. And after that, we will create a controller layer to process those data. And finally, we will create some route as the view layer, as the presentation layer. All right, let's go back to our project. So let's create a database first. We don't have a database yet. I'm gonna open up phpMyAdmin. By the way, this tool comes with SAMP or WAMP. You can create database very easily with this tool. I'm going to create a new database. I'm going to name it Alumni and keep this value as it is and create a new database. The Alumni database has been created, and I'm going to copy that name and open up my project. I'm going to open up my .env file, and here there is a section to define my database credentials. And here the database connection is MySQL, so I don't have to change that. And the database host is localhost, and also the port is I can keep as default, and the database name is Alumni I just created, and this username and password is also same as the default. All right, I'm gonna hit save. Sorry about that, guys. All right. So we connected our database by defining the database credentials, and I'm going to close this file. And now we need to create a table for storing products. Well, in Laravel, when we are developing something in Laravel, we don't just manually create tables. We have something called migrations. As you saw in this folder, migration. Migration is like something like it's a version control for tables. With migrations, you can create tables, you can delete them, you can modify them without losing data. So you can create a table now, and later on you can add more columns to it, add delete columns. You can delete columns, and you can modify the tables very easily without losing data. So migrations are a convenient tool you can use when developing with Laravel. So we don't just create tables manually, we create migrations. There are already two migrations created by default by Laravel. I'm going to delete these two, and I delete the migration folder. Let me create that. All right, so I'm going to open up the terminal, and I'm going to create my first migration that create the products table. All right, in Laravel, we have our own set of commands. We call it artisan commands. Um, to create a migration, we have a separate artisan command called php artisan migration. And then you need to name the migration. You can name it, we need to name it with something that makes sense. So we need to create our products table. So we're gonna name that like that. Migration create products table, so that we can identify this migration very easily. All right, now let's run this migration. By the way, you don't have to memorize these commands, because when you are developing web applications with Laravel, when you are developing just a couple of projects, you will get used to these commands and you will get familiar with it. So you don't have to memorize these. You don't have to pay any extra effort to memorize these commands. Okay, hit enter, and this will create your migration inside this folder. So open that file up, and if you take a closer look at this file, there are two methods, up and down. When you are creating a table, you're gonna need to define your table here. So the up method is executed when you are running the migration. So this down method is for to roll back your change, to roll back your table creations or to modification. All these action will be rolled back in this down method, down function. So you're gonna have to define your table inside this up method. All right, so I'm gonna define my table here. I'm gonna create my products table. All right, here there are two columns that have been already generated by Laravel, which is the ID column and the timestamp column that stores the date and time the records is stored. And I'm gonna now create like this, and then I'm gonna set the data type. The first column should be in our table should be let me take another look at these tables. We're gonna have to create a title column and description column and user ID column and price column. These four columns we need to create here. And okay, the title column should be a string column, and I'm gonna name this column title, and then I should put the length of this column, which is I'm gonna put this 190, and that's how I define title column. And then I'm gonna define the next column, which is the description. I'm gonna name that, I'm gonna use the text data type for that. By the way, you can find all these data types in the Laravel documentation. And I'm gonna name this description. And the next column should be the user ID. And the data type for that should be integer. And the name is user ID. And the last column should be the price column, which is another string. You can use integer or float or any other value, but I will go with this string data type, the price. All right, and I want this description column to be a nullable column, so which means that it should allow null values like this. Okay. So we have defined all the columns in for our table, and this down method has all automatically generated this down function, because when we are creating this migration, it detects this naming convention, so it can identify which name we want our table with. So hit save to save this and open up the terminal. Now we're gonna run this migration so that we can create our database. I'm gonna type another artisan command, php artisan make, not make, php artisan just migrate. So this will run the migration, all the migrations we have created. We only have one, but if we had created multiple migrations, this command will run each and every migration we have. All right, I'm going to hit enter, and migration executed. As you can see these messages. Now let's open up our database in phpMyAdmin and refresh. As you can see, we have created our products table with all the columns we defined. There are few additional columns. The ID column, which is generated by default by Laravel, and this created at and updated at columns, that's automatically generated by Laravel with this function. So that's useful. And as you can see, there is another additional migration, additional table called migration. So this is where the Laravel keep track of all your migrations. You don't have to modify this table, this migration table. Okay, now we have successfully created our first migration and we successfully created our database table. Now, as we discussed, now we have our database table completed. Now we need to create this model layer. So we need to create a model. Okay, so to create a model, it's very easy with Laravel. You just have to type another artisan command, but you need to keep in mind that there is a particular naming convention that you can use with to make it easier. I mean, normally, generally, we name tables in plural format, but for the models, we use singular names. For example, if we name the table as products, we need to define the model as product. So that's the default naming convention with Laravel. All right, I'm going to create my first model, which is product, PHP artisan make model, then the model name, which is product. Use the camel case architecture, which is the first letter should be uppercase and the model name should be like this. I'm going to hit enter and this will create our model. You can find your model inside this app folder and inside this here you can find your model product. And also Laravel has generated this user model as it has generated the user table migration. I'm gonna delete this user. All right, so we have a product model. So we have naming conventions, right? So we don't have to define our table here. If we don't follow this naming conventions like plural, singular format, if you don't follow that, you have to you have to define the table name here. But if you follow the correct naming conventions, so you don't have to specifically define the table name here. Okay, now we have created our model layer. Now let's create a controller to create some methods to access some data. To create a controller, we have an artisan command, php artisan make controller. So when you get a little bit familiar with these commands, you can find a pattern. When you want to create something, you're going to have to use php artisan make like that. All right, php artisan make controller, and the name of the controller should be product controller, and hit enter. This will create the controller, and inside this app folder there is a folder called http, and inside that there is another folder called controllers, and inside that you can find the controller you just created. And there is another controller called controller, just control. That's the base controller. You don't have to delete that or modify anything, modify with that. That because that controller is used by other controllers by extending it. So uh, you don't want to change that controller. So we have created our controller. Now what we want to do is we need to create a method to save some data. So as our application we plan here, we need to implement this endpoint, the post endpoint that save products. All right, we're gonna have to create a function, a special function for that in that controller. All right, so I'm gonna create a new function here, public function. I'm gonna name that function save, and here as the parameter we have to use this request class because we need to access HTTP request. We're gonna have to use this request class here and an instance of that request, so we can access HTTP request. All right, and then we need to create a new instance of product model. I'm going to create a new instance, product equals to new product. So you have to import this class product. Here you can use like this, use app and the model name which is product, like this. So we created a new instance of product model and we need to define all the attributes, all the columns that we need to set values. It will be, we are creating it like this, product, and the first attribute we know, the first column we need to fill is title, and we need to access that title data in our request object. It will be like this. Using this request input method, we're gonna have to define the attribute we're gonna send our HTTP object in our JSON. All right, I'm gonna copy this line few times, and the second column is description, and the third column will be user ID. Oops. And the fourth column should be price. We have questioned that we can use resource in controller. It will be easy now. Yeah, of course, we can use when we are creating the controller, that PHP artisan make controller. We can put some attribute and create something like resource, like this. So it will using that command, that attribute, that resource attribute, will create this save, show, update, and edit, all these functions. It will be automatically generated by Laravel, so we don't have to manually define this function, but still we need to define what's inside. So that's really easy, but I didn't want to make it confusing by using that attribute. That's why I just created this method manually. So of course you can use that attribute and make resource controller and routes as well. And all right, so we have created we have set values to all our columns. Now we need to save this object. Okay, now we need to use this save method like this to save the data. All right, let me check again, and I think we are good to go. Okay, this method will save all the data comes with HTTP request with these values and store them in the products table using this product model. Now, what we are going to do is we're going to create a route to access this method. A route is like a URL. You're going to have to open up this API route file. This is where you can define all the API routes. There are two files that you can define your routes, web file and this web file and this API file. If you are developing just a website or web application that has UIs, you can use this web file. This is where you can define all the web routes. But if you are developing an API, you can define all the API routes here. Okay, now I'm going to create a route to access that method we just created. I'm gonna route, and it will be a post endpoint, post route. So because we're gonna have to send some data in the request body, and as the first argument, we need to pass the first URL segment, which is products. I'm gonna like this, and as the second argument, you're gonna have to pass the controller and the function. The controller we use product controller. Product controller, yes. And the method is we're gonna have to use this @ symbol and use the method we just created like this. And I'm gonna name this route so that I can use this route anywhere in this application. I'm gonna name this like products save. You can name it with whatever you want. Make sure it makes sense, because you don't have to check again and again about on these files to use these anywhere in the application. So route is complete. Yeah, we can access this method using this route. Now what we are going to do is we're going to send some request to this route, and let's see whether that request comes to this method and fill up these attributes, and finally create some record in the database. And I'm going to open up HTTP client using something like I'm going to using this I'm going to be using this tool called Insomnia. You can use something like Postman. I'm going to create a new request. I'm going to name this request save product, and it is a post request, and we have a body, we have a JSON body. I'm going to create this request, and as the URL, I'm going to paste down my product, my application URL, which is localhost. As I can remember, it will be my tutorials. my tutorials and alumni. Let me check again. And alumni, yes. And inside that, blog. And then we are inside this project, and we need to add this public prefix and this API prefix by default by Laravel, and then the URL segment we defined, which is products. And as the request body, I'm gonna have to define a JSON that contains the attributes we want to save as our project, our product. The first value is title. The product title should be something like test product, and for the description, uh, I'm gonna put it like test description, and the user ID. Let me check my method, and yes, I made a little mistake here, and we need to change this as well. We don't have currently users, so we don't normally send user ID with the request. What we do is we get the user ID from the token or from the user that is currently logged in. But here we don't have a user module, so we just have to hard code some user ID here, so that I can send some value to the table, because we don't have users yet in our application. I'm gonna hit save, and the next attribute should be price, and the price should be like this. And let me check again. Yes, we have our values correct, as the JSON is a valid JSON. And let's send this request to our application. I'm gonna hit send, and looks like we are getting some time. Yes. Let me check the table. Well, we don't have created a table. There must be an error. Let me check again. And we have a question called, is it a must to put name attributes in routes? No, it is not a must. You can skip this name attribute and define the route like this. It won't give you any error. But let's say you want to access this route in later on in a controller or somewhere, you have to use something to refer the route. So that's why we use name attribute in routes. All right, let's check what we have made, what mistake we have made here. Um, we have a question that we need to define fillable model in model. No, basically, if you want to something like uh, mass filling, let's say, if you want to recursively fill data in your table, you need to add this fillable attributes, but by default you don't have to do that. Let me check again products route. Let me description, and let me check the logs to see what I have made, what mistakes I have made here. So what we have missed here was a URL. We did have something called alumni like this. So we don't have, we just have an old application there. So we call that URL. So this is our application URL and this is our payload. Now let's call this URL to call our function, call this route and call this function. Okay, let me send this request to our application and we don't get any response. Well, we are not supposed to get any response because we don't return anything here in our function. But let's check our database and let's refresh it. Yes, we have created a new product in our products table. Let's send this request again, and we don't get response because we are not returning anything. Let me refresh this again, and now we have two products, right? So we managed to send some response and access this. We managed to send a request to our application and uh, execute this method and access those HTTP data like this and save those data in our table. All right, so now I'm gonna I can improve this functionality using validations and all, but since we don't have that much of time, I'm gonna create the get method which I can get products. I'm gonna name this function called index like this, and here I need to return in this function. I need to return all the responses, all the records in the products table. Here what I'm going to do is create a new variable called products, and I'm going to use my product model, and in Laravel there is a method called all. This way, with this method it will return all the records in the database. And okay, we get all the records to this variable, but we need to find a way to return those data to the public, to the I mean as the response, as a JSON response. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to return this return, and we have a method called response, so that I can send response, and we need to format that response with JSON. So it will be a JSON response. And here, as the first argument, I need to pass this products object, products array, and as a second argument, I need to set the status code, which is 200 for a successful response. All right, now let's call this uh, function to fetch all the products in our database, in our table. First, I need to create another route for that. I'm gonna create route, and it will be a get endpoint, get route, and the first URL segment would be products, still the products, because we're gonna access the products. Okay, and the second argument is our method, and the method name is index, and I'm gonna name this route as products.index, like this. So the URL segment is correct, and the controller is correct, and method name, and all right, we are good to go. I'm gonna open up my API testing tool, and I'm gonna create new request. I'm gonna name it get product, and it is a get request, and I need to copy this URL. Since this is a get request, we don't have a request body, so we just hit this endpoint, and we get the two records we have in our table in a properly formatted JSON, like this. Let's create another product here with this endpoint, and another one, and let's hit this endpoint, hit this get product endpoint again, and we have our newly created products as well. So guys, we were able to successfully fetch data from our API as well. Before winding up this session, I need to do one thing, that is formatting a proper JSON response for this save method, so that users can get a feedback the record is created. So the status code should be 201, and I'm gonna return a custom array like this, and the first attribute is first array item is message. I'm gonna put this as success, and as the second argument, I'm gonna as the second value, I'm gonna put it as data, and I'm gonna return the newly created product like this. Now let's create another project, another product with this endpoint. Yes, we get a nicely formatted response with the details we provide. I'm going to change this, and yes, we get the product that is created as the response. So, all right, the session took longer than I expected. I'm sorry about that. Well, it is really hard to include everything to a 1 hour session. So I hope you got something from this session, and of course you can contact me for further inquiries and for further help. You can contact me with these options. You can mail me, you can call me, or you can find me on YouTube. And if there's anything regarding Laravel or any other programming language, if that's something I know, I'll be definitely happy to help. Okay. All right. So thank you, guys. If you have any questions, yeah, we have one from Kasun Hasanga. What is the best front-end framework for Laravel Angular? No. Well, there is no such thing called best framework for Laravel. You can use any front-end application. You can use any front-end framework or any mobile framework to use with a Laravel API. It doesn't really matter which framework you use as the front-end framework. What Laravel does is it provides the data layer, data API to access with your front-end application. And any other questions? Well, and one thing I need to mention about validation. I didn't do any validation here before saving data. You need to definitely do a validation, data validation here, because you don't need to mess with your database with invalid or inconsistent data. So before saving this data into the database table, you need to do some validation here or using a separate request file. All right. So looks like we don't have any more questions. And if you do, please reach me with these options. I'll be happy to help. Can you? There's one question. Can you suggest some YouTube channel or website for Laravel? Well, um, there are some YouTube channels that I found helpful for me to when I was learning Laravel. There is something called Academind. They have so many tutorials on Laravel. Some guy called Maximilian. He teach so good, and it's very clear to understand. And there's something called Traversing Media. Those channels are really helpful. They have so much of details when you are learning, uh, when you are watching a video from their channel. And of course, Laravel documentation is the best place. If you find anything struggling when you are developing something, uh, it has so much of details, and it is so easy to find those details in Laravel documentation. They have organized them so well. So I think Laravel documentation is the best place if you find anything struggling when you are developing something. All right. So let me know if you have any questions. You can reach me with these options. Okay. So I'm gonna wind up this session. Thanks for joining. Thanks for. I hope you enjoyed this session, and I wish you good luck for the rest of your career. And we have another questions. Let me answer that really quick. Can you suggest some? Thank you for your session. Oh, that's not the questions. And okay, all right. So I wish you good luck for the rest of your career, and thank you.